So now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to invite my distinguished guests who have been waiting patiently all day. I'd like to invite Jack Bobo and Katrien Verbeke to join me here on stage. And of course, we have Mr. Silviu Popovici, who is waiting online. Can you hear us, Silviu? You can hear us and see us? Okay, your microphone, we need to work on your microphone. We cannot hear you in Brussels. I think it's just a question of turn off your mute button. Silviu, I'll let you deal with the technical team, and I will come back to you in one moment, if that is okay, Silviu. I'll just let the technical team make sure that that connection is clear. And in the meantime, I will take the opportunity to invite my guests here who are with me on the podium. So, Jack Bobo previously served as, just one moment please, Jack, his current job, which he's just in, he told us last night. Apologies, Jack. You were recently appointed a couple of weeks ago as Director of Global Food and Water Policy at the Nature Conservancy, which is one of the forum's partners, the Nature Conservancy. And you previously served as CEO of Futurity, a food foresight company, and author of the book Why Smart People Make Bad Food Choices, which I'm sure will colour a lot of our conversation now in a moment. You previously served as the Chief Communications Officer and Senior Vice President for Global Policy and Government Affairs at Intrexon Corporation. I did have to look that up, and it is a leader in the field of synthetic biology. Prior to joining Intrexon, Jack worked at the US Department of State for 13 years as a senior advisor for global food policy. You're an attorney with a scientific background. You hold a Master of Science in Environmental Science, in Biology, and a BA in Psychology and Chemistry. Interesting mix there, Jack. Yeah. And you're viewed as a global thought leader who has delivered more than 500 speeches in 50 countries on the future of food. And we look forward to your intervention here today. A very warm welcome to Jack, please. And also Katrien Verbeke, who is CEO of the Let Us. Katrien has more than 17 years' experience in building sustainable food systems, playing a key role in establishing sustainable, local, healthy food systems here in her native Belgium. Before starting as a social entrepreneur 2 years ago, she led the sustainability team of a food retailer, and you developed the City of Ghent's food policy, which you discussed with us last night over dinner, which received, and bravo, the United Nations Global Climate Award Action Award rather. You work on solutions, which is following on from the three women earlier on the panel with Stephen. You work on solutions related to local food and short supply chains, food environments, access to food, food waste and circular economy, monitoring, and interestingly, urban agriculture. Her organisation, Let Us, which we hope to hear about later, develops new solutions in partnership and collaboration with different types of stakeholders, interestingly enough, both in the profit and non-profit sectors. So a very warm welcome to Katrien, ladies and gentlemen. And last, but by no means least, Silviu, can you hear us? And can we hear you is the question.
Yes, I can.
Loud and clear. Loud and clear, we have you in Brussels. Good to hear from you. You're joining us online this afternoon. Just to introduce you to the forum, Silviu became the Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo Europe in August 2019. I would like to point out that PepsiCo is also one of the forum's partners. Prior to this, Silviu served as President of Europe Sub-Saharan Africa from September 2017 until March 2019. He previously headed PepsiCo's business in Russia, Ukraine, and the CIS. Subtle, Silviu, subtle. For 2 years, and prior to that, spent 3 years as president. And just to say that you hold an advanced management program at the Harvard Business School as well, Silviu. A very warm welcome to one and all panelists. Silviu, I'm going to start with you because you're joining us online. As per the previous panel discussions, I'd invite you to make a brief statement just to give us an idea of this topic about accessing healthy food choices. So you have around 3 minutes, Silviu, so if you could stick to the timeline, we'd love to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Right, so thank you very much for having me. I just discovered the mute button, so now I can talk.
Good.
If I look at it, I have to say that I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because I think from a healthy food perspective, we are in a very good place. I think that there is no discussion around the direction of travel. There is a lot of discussion about speed of travel.
Okay,
And
Silvio, I'm going to
listen,
interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you very briefly. You're breaking up on us. I'm not sure if you could maybe get closer to your microphone, but we're getting the gist of what you're saying. Maybe just get a little bit closer to that mic, if you don't mind.
right. Can you hear me
Okay?
now?
Yeah, you're clearer now, Ivan. Yeah. So stay where you are. Stay put.
Okay, so just saying that I'm optimistic because we are in a very good momentum. We have a consumer that is looking for healthier and more sustainable to grow food. We have the retailer partners that are looking to nudge consumer to healthier choices. We have the whole food and beverage industry looking to transform the industry and to make products healthier. And we have, of course, the farmers. And of course, if you add to this the farm to fork strategy, it's a great ecosystem that is pushing the food and beverage industry to transform. And every company, a lot of companies in the industry, including mine, are making very strong commitments, and not commitments, but also investments. Our strategy is focused on positive agriculture, positive value chain, and positive choices, as we don't see that the consumer should compromise when they choose great tasting product, and also that they can be healthier. The work that is going on around with the R&D and then augmented by the right level of technology that we are now access can transform the whole food chain from the way the food is grown, is produced, is distributed, and ultimately is consumed. So as I said, I'm very optimistic for all this transformation supported by farm to fork strategy.
Okay, Sylvia, we'll come back to you in a moment with some questions. Maybe the technical team might be able to advise on sound quality. It isn't excellent currently. So, Sylvia, I'll return to you in one moment. I'll just hear first from Jack. This book that you wrote, Jack, last year when the rest of us were lounging around teleworking, you created a book in 2021, Why Do Smart People Make Bad Food Choices? First of all, as per usual, just a 3-minute introduction, but maybe integrate the sense that that book or some of the findings that you got on the basis of that research, Jack, if you don't mind.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. For me, the impetus for writing the book was really this question about why is it at a moment in time when we have never known more about health and nutrition in the history of the planet, we have never been more obese? Why, when you can go into a grocery store and buy more healthy food choices than ever before, have we never been more obese? And while the commissioner put the problem in perspective in terms of Europe, in the United States, 42% of all Americans are obese, 75% are overweight or obese. It will be 50% by 2030 if we don't do something about it. Now, some of you may think, well, that's America. Well, the problem is, if we went back to 1970, the obesity rate in America was lower than most countries in Europe. So this is something that has occurred in just a generation or so. And that, of course, is the challenge, that things have gotten so bad so quickly, but it also suggests that things could get better quickly if we could address this. And we've talked a lot about information, but what I talk about in the book is really about the psychology, the environmental forces that are actually making us, creating the problem. So if we know more and we have better choices, why are we obese? And so much has changed. It's really our food environment, and yet so many of the solutions we focus on are the nutrients in the food, the macronutrients, the micronutrients, the salt, the sugar, and other things. But if you look at the number of calories the average American eats every year today, it's about 20% more than they were eating each day in 1970. Well, if you eat 20% more of anything, you're probably going to gain a little weight. And so the problem has occurred in a short time. And in some ways, it all goes back to one person, David Wallerstein, in the 1960s. He was working at a movie theater chain, and he was tasked with selling more food at this concession stand. And he tried everything to get Americans to eat more, and he couldn't do it. And it finally hit him, what if I gave them a bigger size? And he introduced the jumbo-sized popcorn. And of course, all the sales took off. Nobody had apparently ever thought of this idea in the 10,000 years of human civilization. And he later went to work for a small food company called McDonald's, and he convinced the founder, Ray Kroc, to offer a large-size bag of fries. And that didn't happen until 1972. But the point is that things have changed dramatically. And most of us don't even know what an adult serving of food looks like. Because if you went to McDonald's, you'd have to order the kids' meal to get close. And yet the hamburger's pretty similar, but the small fry in a kid's meal is a large fry from 1972, and the 12-ounce soda, well, that's 50% more soda than you would have gotten in 1955. So again, so much of our food environment has changed, and we have to find ways to do it. And so the last part of the book is how do we use what we've learned about behavioral science, what Per was talking about this morning, in order to reshape our food environment so every day you lose a little bit of weight, and so 20 or 30 years from now, we find out that we've all lost 10 or 20 pounds and nobody actually knows how we did it, but our food environment is working for us instead of against us.
Okay, well, we'll go back to those topics in a moment, but basically the odds are stacked against us, is what you're saying. The culture, the food environment, things have changed in such a way that smart people are making bad food choices, as per your book. We will now move over to Katrien Verbeke. Perhaps you could tell the audience, the forum, about this Let Us initiative and also how you engaged with the Ghent City Council, right, in terms of creating a food policy within Ghent and how that template is then being sort of emulated in the likes of Antwerp here in Belgium. Katrien, go ahead.
So I've worked in profit, I worked in local government, and I work independently across this food supply chain. I really look at the food system in a holistic way and look for these missing links and try to build the connections because, and it's mentioned here and there, but there are real gaps within the system, and there's lots of things happening bottom-up, small scale, but they're afraid to even try to talk to the big players, and lots of them are in the room here. And so I somehow talk the language of both of them and try to build bridges and co-create solutions. And it's a lot about building relationships and thus building respect. And what is interesting, I think, is, so I developed one of the first urban food policies, the first one in Belgium, one of the first in Europe for the city of Ghent, 10 years ago. And you've seen cities step up, taking the lead government-wise. And it's interesting, and it's interesting to see why have cities taken up this role. And I see two things. One is finance is not the bottom line of a city. The end game of a city is not making money for shareholders. It's about well-being of their citizens. That's what it's about. So money is a tool for a city, money is a tool for a government. It's not the end game. So that is fundamentally a different approach. And I would love to see more companies using that same approach. That's one thing. Two is cities are close to their local ecosystem. So they still have this relationship with their citizens, with the supermarket owners, with the store managers, with the chefs, etc. They're close to their people. And the farther you get, the longer your chain in different ways, the more anonymous it gets. And that brings me back to the point of Per this morning, from the point of distance. And a city is not distant. A city is much closer in the system. So it's much easier for them, or it makes much more sense to start from these closer and thus more respectful relationships to build the right solutions. And for me, one of the real issues in healthier food is, and it was mentioned this morning, is like follow the money. And the money is not going to the farmers today. The money is going to the traders, the companies that add sugar, salt, fat. That's where the money is going. And what I want to see is, I would love to see companies that start to fight the system they've created and use their intelligence they have to find the new solutions. And we need these companies, we need their intelligence, we need their best people, we need their efficient logistics, etc. But we need them to put it in a purpose-driven company and not dollar-driven company. And I think that is really one of the challenges. Have companies that dare to think from a purpose-driven perspective, and then they will come up with other and better solutions.
Okay, Katrien. Well, that's a natural segue now back to Silvio. Silvio, that last point raised by Katrien, I suppose the question is, what is the responsibility of food industry towards consumption habits and food choices for consumers? We see you there drinking your tin of Pepsi Cola. PepsiCo obviously has a raft of products, 7-Up, fizzy drinks. Okay, there's Max as well, Pepsi Max. But what's the responsibility of the food industry in this whole debate, nudging us consumers towards healthier food choices or just changing our behavior? Industry, let's say
Yeah,
globally for starters.
I think the industry has the responsibility both to lead, to follow the consumer trends and to shape the consumer trends. And you mentioned the fact that I'm drinking Pepsi Max. If you go back 20 years ago in UK, 80% of our all soft drinks sold in UK, they are full sugar. Today is the opposite. 80% is zero sugar. Actually, 90% is zero sugar. And this is because two things. One is we exclusively focus only on non-sugar variant. And ultimately, the sugar tax that was introducing several years ago nudged even more consumer towards non-sugar variant. I expect that in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have 100% of the all soft drinks that we sell will be sugar-free. And also, we are working with the R&D that long-term will be also artificial-free beverage. So you can enjoy a product that is great tasting, but it also is healthy. If I go and take on the food thing, we have a commitment to transform our portfolio in food also, in snacks, also in the same way. Our commitment that we made last year is to create a business in snacks of $1 billion over the next 8 years, which is Nutri-Score A and B. And today is just, it's very, very small. So this is a part of how do we try to portfolio and then obviously to take the consumer with us to healthier choices.
Okay, I get what you're saying there about a reduction in sugar, but reducing sugar in a tin of a fizzy drink, I don't think that makes the product healthy. I suppose my question relates then to chronic diseases that we heard so much about during COVID, for example, people suffering from diabetes, people with underlying heart disease, linked to all of these processed foods that we have been consuming for the past 30 years or so. So what is your company doing to reduce the impact of these products on the health, the global health of consumers? And then, Jack, I'm going to come to you. So, Silvio, maybe another question from you in terms of what's your company doing to reduce the impact, the health impact on consumers?
Right, so just one more point that we are strong believers, it's the portion control. And we are trying to make sure that we nudge consumer, we introduce portion control, so portions that are below 100 calories, and that will allow consumers to eat just the right amount of calories during a snack. As we said, if we take through transparency, and we are big supporters of Nutri-Score implementation, and Nutri-Score is one proxy for what you can, like how you can look at the food as less healthier, more healthier. And we are looking to transform more and more of our products portfolio to be in the Nutri-Score A and B. And we think that this transformation, if it's done at scale, will make a massive difference in the way people eat and what they eat.
Okay, thank you for that, Silvio. There's just a question that's come in right now, and I might just put that to you while we have you online and the line is clear. It's a question from Mello Robson, and the question is, how do we make healthy food available and affordable to those poorest, even in Europe, who don't even have food on the table at all? Actually, Silvio, I'm going to put that to Jack, actually, if you don't mind. Silvio, I'll come back to you in a moment. Jack, maybe if the question's right in front of you there. How do we make this food available and affordable to the poorest, even in Europe, even in the United States, when we don't have, who do not have food on the table at all? What do you say to that?
Yeah, and I think it's an important point that we haven't touched on quite as much so far today. There's been a conversation around the true cost accounting, and much of that is about making food more expensive to take into account. And yet, I think that we need to recognize that increasing the cost of food will have a negative impact on a certain number of people, and that needs to be clear. And so, that may come down to subsidies. It may come down to other programs. I think that it will take a range of things. I think there's some interesting things that are happening in the United States and some other places with insurance companies where, they're looking at underlying. So this isn't just about poverty, but also about health and giving people a prescription for fruits and vegetables. And so I think that there are some innovative ways of addressing
That's
some
pretty
of
worrying though, Jack, right? That's a poor reflection of our society if I have to go to a pharmacy and somebody say you need to eat more oranges, Rose, you know?
Well, and from
is
the
this where we're
behavioral
at? Is this where we're at?
Well, from a behavioral standpoint, what we need to do is make the fruits and vegetables so amazing that people want them. And Google, as a company, worked with the Culinary Institute of America to create a 72-hour course for chefs so that they would do a better job and that they would give the same level of attention to the vegetables that they tend to give to the meat products. And you know, that's part of it, is if we can make food taste good, people will just choose it. And you know, more and more of the plate will become healthier, and you really won't have to force people to do it. They'll do it because they want to. And you know, that's about reshaping the food environment so that it does the work for us.
Okay, thanks for that, Jack. I might go back to you, Silvio, and then I'm going to go to Catherine. I read your article on the Financial Times, and then there was some commentary surrounding that article where you spoke about PepsiCo positive. And I just wanted to pick up one point, Silvio, if you don't mind. Companies such as your own, PepsiCo, should go further and faster downstream through suppliers to support and drive the transition to a sustainable food system at every level of production. The question is, do you have access to data? This whole idea, and Catherine raised it, this idea of access to data to inform those decisions. Or else are we talking about greenwashing? As a company, as a global conglomerate, do you have access to that data in the downstream, Silvio, in terms of your suppliers, etc.?
Right. So just a comment first. I fully agree that the consumer will not trade off taste, convenience, and value. And this is an important thing, because if we want to nudge consumer to healthier choices, we have to make sure that the food is tastier, the food is offered in a convenient way, and the value, the cost, the price of that food is still very low. So these are things which are guiding our decision. Going to your question, we have both. Yes, we do have the data for part of the upstream, where we are in direct contact with the farmers for crops like potatoes, oats, some of the corn, and some of the oranges that we use. And for others, we don't have direct access to the data. And of course, like any other company, this is a challenging situation. We are getting more and more integrated with our suppliers, so we're not integrated aligned, I would say, and we are also starting to put more traceability in place. And of course, the issue of traceability and the data, it's absolutely critical to be able to control. But there are examples where we are able to have the visibility across all the value chain. You know, the palm oil will be one example, and similar examples and certification process are introduced across the different crops as we speak.
Okay, and what about water consumption, sustainable water consumption? I noticed water has not really been raised at today's forum. A company like PepsiCo, I would imagine, has a high content of water needs and requirements. Where are we with, say, wastewater recycling, those sort of initiatives?
Yes, absolutely, massive opportunity. And I say the consumption in our manufacturing process is one, but also the consumption in agriculture is another. They use a lot of water for irrigation. So in both cases, a lot of work is going down from precision agriculture, where we're trying to control the water that is used in irrigation. And again, to earlier point, data plays a big role here, and using advanced technologies to irrigate and using the data to control the irrigation process. It's something that we are doing across the world, and also the same efforts in our manufacturing practice, where we are circulating the water, including we're experimenting, even capturing the water that is evaporating from potatoes when we fry them, and to take that water, clean it, and use it back in the manufacturing process. So water, it is a big thing, especially even in Europe, in areas like south of Spain, and surprisingly even Belgium. And we are doing a lot of work in water conservation across the globe.
Okay, Silvio, thank you for that. Now, going back to Catherine, this Ghent Food Policy Council, could you perhaps just remind us how that came about and how you're maybe distributing that model within Belgium or beyond, Catherine?
It came about based on dialogue and talking to the different actors in the food system, both profit, non-profit, your citizens' voice, so the different voices. And it's really building with them the solutions. And what was very interesting to see is that we set up a food council, which is a place where we allowed the people from the food system to decide on the direction we had to move into as a city. And it's taking steps it's really pioneering for governments. And I think food is the topic is one of the ones where they go furthest in pioneering in participative governance and having the food system stakeholders decide on the direction to go to, but also participatory budgeting. So along the way, we started to give budget to the Food Council that became in charge of saying, if we want to make the right choices, invest the money in the right way, how should we do it? And I think this is also interesting. You could take this reflection to company perspective. Why not invite your stakeholders also not to decide on where the money goes and how it's being invested in a right way? And start with having the right stakeholders around the table. And you see, I think what you see in these cities is it's about local food, it's about access to food, about food waste, the circularity of the whole food system, but by also providing a place to meet, a place to getting to know each other, and a safe space which creates opportunities. And that's very interesting to see. Again, it builds respect, and that is key in coming to the right solutions.
Okay.
I would also like to build on, if I can, on the food insecurity question.
Please go ahead, Kathleen. Yeah.
Because this morning, food security was mentioned several times, more from a European and global perspective. And as the question stated very correctly, there's also a lot of food insecurity in countries like Belgium, and that's a real issue. So it's also here within our hands, within the classrooms of our children. And there's some real challenges and solutions. So yes, we need to pay more for food. There needs to be an honest price for our food. And of course, you need solidarity mechanisms to provide access to food. And as Stephen mentioned very correctly before, the food desert challenge is one that is around us. And also in Belgium, in cities like Brussels, in cities like Ghent, there are areas in the city where there's no fresh food to be bought within a kilometer walking distance. That's a problem. And then I call to the retailers, for example. Retailers are strong at providing access to food and providing the right stores to do so. And they should take up responsibility not only to look at the richer areas in the country where it's most interesting to open up a supermarket. They should dare to say, we also tackle those food desert areas, and we go there because we want these people also to have access to food. And then one of the things that hasn't been mentioned all day long, according to me, is the power of food to create jobs. The answer to poverty is income. And food is a huge sector. Production, we've talked about 500 million farmers, and they're amongst the most food insecure people, so it's an absurd situation. But also, if we relate to the Ukrainian crisis and the immigrants, the refugees coming to our countries, Ukraine is a food country, so see the potential, job-related, income-wise related, and the opportunities to really create solutions there. And I've seen cities around the world doing this. Toronto, for example, has a program for immigrants where they train them, they help them get the right certificates to get their own food startup started. So it's a question of they have the knowledge, they have the expertise facilitated for them to work in this context. Quito in Ecuador is another beautiful example that has about 4,000, 5,000 urban farmers. They have urban plots, but they also set up a market system which enabled them to get income from what they produce. And this is something we shouldn't forget about. It's generating income, and that's finally one of the solutions to food insecurity.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Kathleen. I'm going to go now to Jack once again and to draw on your experience in global food policy. What sort of positives are emerging from this debate, and where are we going horribly wrong?
Well, that's a big question. Well, one area where I think we're missing it is in how we're framing the conversation, and some of that's come out before. In many ways and in many forums, they frame it as agriculture is a problem that must be solved. And if we look at the impact of agriculture in terms of land and water and climate, there are clear impacts and they're massive. But if we were farming today the way we farmed in 1960, we would need 1 billion additional hectares of land in order to feed the world we have today. And that's 1/4 of all the forests that exist on the planet. And so you see forests that are cut down to make way for agriculture. You don't see that 1 billion hectares that are remaining because of agriculture. And so, you know, to produce a bushel of corn in America, we use 50% less water, 35% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, 60% less erosion on the land, and 40% land to produce that bushel. So by every single measure, farmers are wildly better today than they were in 1960. But we're asking them to produce even more. So it's not that they're doing worse and worse every year, it's just that they're falling further and further behind because of the challenges that they face. And so, you know, one of the things I would say is I would encourage people to frame it as agriculture is good and getting better, but not fast enough.
Sure, but something is, the system must be flawed though, Jack, because I mean, earlier on in the discussion, we're talking about, you know, 50% of the population overweight, nearly 1 billion who don't have access to a meal per day. I mean, there's starvation in this world, and then there's the obesity epidemic or pandemic, whichever you wish to call it. So we're obviously, there's a flawed food system underpinning all of this, and this is a big question, and we're nearly running out of time, Jack. So, I mean, looking ahead, what should we be doing?
Right. I mean, it feels like a broken food system, but if the system is broken, when was it not broken?
Right.
And so I think, again, you know, it doesn't mean that it's perfect, but, you know, there are many things that are good about it. You know, 7 to 10% of people on the planet, 700 to 800 million people, will go to bed hungry tonight. But 50 years ago, 1/3 of all the people on the planet went to bed hungry. So we need to think about where we've been in order to understand where we need to go. And so I think the importance of this conversation is that if we had been talking about agriculture 10 years ago, you were probably talking about sustainable intensification. You weren't talking about regenerative agriculture, which is taking into account soil microbes and eutrophication of water. So we're thinking harder about what we're doing today, and that's all really, really important. But we need to empower the farmers to take advantage of those tools in order to do a better job and not blaming them for not having done everything already. And, you know, so that's a conversation between the farmer, those in the food system, and the consumer. Mm-hmm. And again, by changing the system from a behavioral standpoint, we can deliver better outcomes. If we could get people eating the proper food that was healthy for them, we would immediately be needing 20% fewer calories. You know, 40% of food waste is post-consumer. That's behavior. That's nothing for the food industry to do. Sure. You know, if you get a steak, you don't cut the fat off of it the way our grandparents did, because the food industry is already doing all of that for us. So a lot of the waste has been eliminated from the system, and the stuff that remains is just hard. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it's just because it's not easy to do.
Sure, but I think the rate of waste, still 1/3 of the food that we purchase, right, is thrown out. Silvio, I might just go back to you, if you don't mind.
Just one point, that,
yes.
You know, food waste is not a problem, it's 1,000 problems. Mm-hmm. You know, the 3 most wasted food items are bread, potatoes, and apples. The food waste challenge is not the same for any of them. And so again, we need to recognize that in order to solve it, we need to, you know, address it, you know, meet it where it is.
Sure. And maybe, I mean, without being condescending again, the whole idea of consumer education around food waste and the understanding of best before dates, the understanding of labeling, etc. Thanks for that, Jack. Silvio, the discussion that we had prior to this panel was on building in externalities into the price of food, this whole idea of food price mechanisms. What's your take on that, coming from an industry with products like, you know, the ones we mentioned earlier on? What would be the direct impact if those sort of externalities were taken on board and put into your products, for example? Would you see a hike in price?
Yeah, this is a very good point and a very complex issue, obviously. We are experimenting with internal price of carbon, for example, to try to take in consideration the carbon footprint when we take decisions, so try to educate every part of the organization. to see the full, at least the carbon cost of externalities. I think that indeed, if you'll factor in the externalities, our cost of doing business will go up. Having said this, I don't think that the consumer will be ready to pay for it. As I said earlier, I don't think consumer will be ready to trade for value, or they can afford to trade for value. So this will be a big tension for the businesses to address in the future, finding the way to absorb a lot of the cost of moving to more sustainable business model and or the cost of externalities.
Okay, Silvio, thank you very much for that. I'm going to open it up to the floor now, ladies and gentlemen. We've got about 7 minutes left or so. Hands up if anybody has a question for either of the three panelists, because I see no question coming in on my digital platform, unfortunately. Oh, we do. Javier Ruiz, WWF, please get a microphone to this gentleman about 5 seats, 5 rows back. There we go. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Javier Ruiz from WWF. Jack, I wanted to ask you one question. You told us 2 stories. One of them was about how consumption has changed and how we have adopted diets that are a lot less healthy than in the past, and how the bigger sizes of portions, etc., and that development over the last 50, 60 years. And at the same time, also the story about how agriculture has improved in many aspects in that same period. So the question, I'm bringing it a little bit to the topic that we are discussing now. What if we had done both things well? And that's, I think, the important thing. How much more could we have saved in terms of world forests, whatever you name it, other environmental impacts, if we had taken the right measures in terms of avoiding creating, let's say, the food environments that have driven people to adopt unhealthy diets? And I think that's one of the crucial elements now in the debate. How important it is that we adopt also public policies supporting the evolution towards healthier, more sustainable diets. And I think that sometimes, at least here in Brussels, when we try to bring the topic to the fore, one of the answers that we can get sometimes even from policymakers is we cannot tell people what to eat. And personally, I find this does not make sense, because we are telling people what to eat all the time. All the time. We are fully conditioned all the time in our choices. And that's, I think, what the food environment's logic also shows. And it's like, well, if we are fully conditioned, why we have this kind of perception that, oh, somebody's now going to tell me to change something, where we are absolutely, in my impression is that we are absolutely conditioned nowadays, and we have adopted diets and ways of living that we really didn't have a choice. And I wanted to see what you thought about that. Thank you.
Okay, Jack, go
Sure.
ahead.
So for 10,000 years, farmers were asked to do one thing, and that's produce more food. We're at that one unique moment in time where they're not only being asked to produce more, but better food, food that's better for people and the planet. So it is a transition, figuring out how this works. It's also complicated because, making more food means food prices go down. And when food prices go down, people tend to overeat. And so the same thing that's reduced global hunger is also leading to overconsumption. And so, it's going to take policy in order to figure out how that works. Just increasing cost, though, will make the poorest people less secure, and maybe it'll make the richest people healthier. So that's not necessarily a good outcome either. A lot of the things that policy has tried to achieve have had just the opposite impact. And that's part of what I cover in the second part of my book. Back in the 1980s in the United States, the government pushed for low-fat diets. I'm sure it was probably similar here in Europe. And food companies did what we would hope they would do. They offered low-fat options. The problem is that our brains then got involved and screwed it all up, because they thought, oh, if one low-fat cookie is good for me, the whole bag is going to be great. And so a lot of things that we did, had the opposite impact. We think, oh, it's a plant-based burger, so I can eat 2 of them. Being plant-based doesn't make it healthier, and so, it may make it better for the environment. And so again, the psychology of all of this is complicated, but I think we're beginning to learn what we need to know in order to do a better job of implementing policies that can help to address that. I'm optimistic, but, it's because we have the tools, and there's certain examples of it having been applied in good ways. And just one example before I pass it on is that, in the UK, you have the Collaboration for Healthier Lives. They've been working with grocery stores, and over the course of a year, by redesigning the layout of grocery stores, they've been able to increase by 10 to 15% fruit and vegetable purchases. And the consumers have no idea that they're buying more. They're just getting a positive impact out of that. And so I think the more we can understand how to do that, work with human behavior instead of against it, the more likely we are to be successful.
Sure, that's a good point, and I think that leads very nicely to the next question that I'm taking from the screen in front of me. I might put it to Catherine, if you don't mind. The question comes in from Neri Ozer, and the question is, ever-increasing prices for all kinds of reasons cannot be a solution to the food problem. Why do we directly assume that healthy food is more expensive? While companies keep making high profits, why should consumers pay more and more to access healthy food and water, which is a human right? And this was one of the points raised at a previous panel discussion. So, I mean, something Neri Oza says there, why do we directly assume that healthy food is more expensive? That isn't obviously the case. If you buy in season, if you buy locally produced foods. Either of you, Catherine, maybe you might take that one, please.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it should be the easy choice, the logical choice. And that's the whole food environment discussion. That is a logical choice, which doesn't mean if we look at the past 10, 20 years, food is becoming cheaper and cheaper. So that wasn't the solution either, I think. So it is okay, I think, for a while that food becomes more and more expensive, because that's where it should be. Which is, of course, then, given an example, a farmer today in Belgium that sells a kilo of potatoes gets 12 cents for it. It's being sold in the store for €1.20. Which means that only 20% of that price goes to the farmer. And I can tell you, he has put much more energy and time in producing than that there was put in trading a raw product, which is just remains the potato it was. And 80% of the margin goes to the next steps in the supply chain. So yes, and that's where your local, your shorter food supply chains are part of that answer. If you buy straight from the farmer, and I know that's not the end solution, that we all go to the farm. So we need supermarket expertise to have this one-stop shop convenient solution, but with the principles of short food supply chains integrated in it. And so that is where I see these bottom-up initiatives trying to develop the right model, and I see the bigger system actors that can have the real impact. And it's connecting these two worlds where the solutions are and where we can change the food system.
Thank you, Catherine, for that. Did I see another question in this quadrant? Yes, the lady with the hand up, about 6 rows from the back. If we could get a micro over there, please.
While we're waiting, I'd make a plug for making frozen and canned sexy.
For the book, Jack,
no,
again?
No, I'm
or,
just making a plug. We talk a lot about fresh food, but
right.
I think, we shouldn't demonize frozen and canned. For many people, it's the best option, and if we make it something that people look down on, I think we discourage people from using it, and it's often a great choice. So.
Okay, thanks for that, Jack. If you'd like to take the floor, please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Hi, this is Marie from Thought for Food. Great discussion. Jack, you told us we need to look in the past. You said the system is not working badly. We set it up the way it is. Fair enough. We needed more production. We needed more food. We've heard today we produce enough. We've heard we lose a lot of food in the home. We hear that the consumers should be the ones paying more. However, I think it's very easy to put the blame on the consumers because that is great for messaging. I think it's great to say the farmers should do it because we've heard they're a bit removed, so we can do that. Which brings us to PepsiCo, who are global, who are really big, who have a huge influence on the system. So while we're rethinking what we're doing, while we're saying, okay, what we did in the past might not work anymore, do we not want maybe a world where PepsiCo can lead instead of reacting to what consumers want, instead of reacting to policies? Could we not have a system where PepsiCo leads the way for this healthier choices and not by making us all laugh by drinking your drink on screen, but instead setting the path by having a healthy something there and helping make that shift with you and those global big players coming together and leading that charge. So I'd like to know what you think about that. And also whether, that might mean that PepsiCo might not hit the same growth targets as before, but it might make it, in the long run, a better organization, both for you and for the planet.
Okay, thank you for that question. Silvio, would you like to respond to that?
At least I'll try. So
Go right ahead.
Right. So indeed, we are looking to transform the products that we are selling to make healthier products a bigger part of our portfolio. We already have a lot. Alvae, which is a gazpacho brand, and the Quaker Roots in Europe, but also we have a similar thing in US. We are the largest nuts company in the world, and that is probably something that everyone knows. And we keep adding a healthier portfolio in our business. Our goal is also to transform the core, because if you stay only on the edges and will not be able to really influence and change the consumer's behaviors. But if we are be able to have snacks that are also not just enjoyable and healthy, this will really make a difference to overall to the diet of the people in Europe and beyond. So transforming the core for us is key, while keep evolving the portfolio to have more healthy choices, like the examples I just gave.
Okay, can I just ask, how has the crisis in the Ukraine impacted PepsiCo? Presumably, PepsiCo, as a conglomerate, you have plants throughout the country of Ukraine, throughout Russia. Obviously, this is impacting on employment. It's impacting on people's livelihoods. Could you perhaps just give us a brief overview of how the crisis has impacted people on the ground, boots on the ground, pardon the pun, but yes, people who work for your company?
Indeed. We are the food and FMCG company in Ukraine. We have a big business in dairy. We have a big business in food. We have a big business in beverages. We have 3,100 associates. 1,600 of them already moved to different parts of Ukraine, and more than 200 and the number of deputies out of Ukraine. So it's a real human tragedy. We stopped all the factories at the first day of the war, and we are supporting all the families to move to safer zones in Ukraine. And in Europe, once in Europe, in other countries like Romania, Poland, Slovakia, and beyond, we're trying to support every family moving as much as possible. So yes, we have no business at the moment in Ukraine, and we don't expect that we'll have any business soon. In the meantime, the priority number one is is our employees and their families, and then the community in Ukraine that we are doing as much as possible to help.
Okay, Silvio, thanks for that. I'm just going to go to the technical team, and do we have our next speaker online? Could someone give me a thumbs up if we have, is everything okay? Okay, very good. Well, listen, I am going to wrap that up here. I'm going to thank my speakers, Mr. Jack Bobo, Catherine Verbeke, and Silvio Popovici, apologies, who joined us online. So a very warm thank you to one and all. And now I'm going to introduce our next guest. So if you two would like to just go back to the auditorium, thank you very much for that.